this is a question you've probably been asked before, but we were just talking, to fill everyone in, we were just talking about how you're not getting asked the same questions over and over again, but I'm going to start with one. You are a newcomer to this world, and there's a huge responsibility that comes along with that. I think people not only love those original 3 movies, but they love the book that this is based on. They have a great deal of affection for these characters, and you are now the embodiment of that character. Do you give yourself, or do you allow yourself to think about that before growing the beard and getting the hair extensions and stepping on set, or no?
Yeah, and I do. It was something that I was aware of from the very beginning, that the responsibility of taking on that character. But, I am one of those people that love the book, that have envisioned that character. And it took me a while to be convinced that I could do it. And it wasn't until I saw some sketches by Alan Lee and John Howe that there's one particular pencil sketch, and there's something about this character's eyes and the way that his hands are crossed that I thought, you know what, actually I think I can do this. I think that I could pull this off. Tolkien described Thorin in a fairly limited way, really, in a way that works in a novel, but when you're going to realize a character through a movie visually and have an emotional connection with him, I felt that it was worth taking that and then expanding it. So, but yeah, I tried to take on that responsibility with a certain amount of humility. But yeah, as a fan of the books, I'm probably my own worst critic.
When did you come to the books in terms of your own life? Did you read them when you were a kid, or was it something that I've talked to lots of people, we reread them every day or every year, once a year?
Yeah, I remember being read The Hobbit by a teacher in primary school who did amazing voices, God bless her, and I picked up the book myself and started reading it, which was kind of rare, because normally I have to be forced to read. That led me to read Lord of the Rings as well, and that was the one I read over and over. And then, of course, I was in a stage production of The Hobbit when I was 13, which I leapt at because, and it's weird how you have that reaction when someone says they're doing a stage production at 11 to go, I've read that book, I love it, let me do it, let me be in it. And I had the same feeling when they were making this movie. I was like, I actually felt it for The Lord of the Rings, but I was never in a position to kind of go meet Peter Jackson. But then when The Hobbit came along, I was like, this is meant to be. I had no idea how I'd fit into that story, because the idea of playing a dwarf just wasn't on my radar. I'm 6'3.5", so why on earth would I play a dwarf? So, but yeah, it was very much I think my imagination had been crafted through reading The Hobbit. I all of those things that Tolkien loves, like secret doors, keys, codes, darkness, getting lost in the woods. It's like every child's fantasy adventure, isn't it, really?
Well, the thing that strikes me about these books and the movies is that while they seem incredibly complex, there's a lot of lore that goes along back with them. The swords, but the goblin swords are forged by, There's all sorts of... But really, at their core, these movies are really simple. The stories are simple because they're about really primal things. Yeah. They're about good versus evil. They're about realizing your full potential. They aren't about things... I don't want to say they're not about deep things, because they are maybe about the deepest things that we have, but they're primal things, yeah, which I think is what makes them so everlasting. These books have been around for a very long time. The movies, though, if you still look at the first 3 movies, they're as fresh as they were, 10 or 12 years ago when they first came out.
Yeah. It's something that I'm continuing to research, really, because Tolkien wrote this in 1937. He'd lost many friends in World War I, very, very close friends at the Battle of the Somme, and I'm sure being called upon to go into that extraordinarily terrifying place as an ordinary Englishman that just loved his hearth and home is at the root of all of his storytelling. But at the same time, he didn't really enjoy allegory, but he was a devout Catholic, and I feel that there's a kind of Christian message that comes through his writing without any kind of preaching. There's just some idea of chivalry and nobility that's expressed through kindness and mercy. I think that's kind of key to Tolkien, and it definitely harks back to his experiences in that war. But also the dwarves, the exiled people who are sort of fighting to return to their homeland. And I think Tolkien has said himself that it resonated for him with the idea of the Jewish people. And there's a very interesting letter that he wrote in response to a German publisher during the Second World War who had referenced that the dwarves may have been the Jews, and was Tolkien a Jew? And I think he'd written back something along the lines of, I regret that I'm not one of those very great people. So I don't know. There's all of these ideas that sort of filter into his writing in what is a children's book. That's what it comes down to. It's a children's book, but it has this sort of resonance of his whole life.
Well, I think that's why people read it every year. I mean, I cannot tell you the amount of people that have told me this. It's a book that they go back to over and over and over again, because I do think it's something that you get something new out of probably every time.
Yeah. And actually, it's the type of book that, every parent has possibly read it that gives it to their child, and you'd happily hand that over to your kid and say, just have a look at that, just read that on your own, and you'll learn something from it. You'll gain something from it, whether it's emotional or an imagination or a profound understanding of what it means to step out of your front door and be brave and go on a quest. I'll certainly give it to my kids.
What do you remember about the production of The Hobbit that you were in when you were a child?
I remember wearing a knitted smock which had been sprayed silver to look like chainmail, but it was made of wool.
And you were a dwarf then, or?
I was an elf. I was pretty tall at 11 years old, or 13. And then Gollum was made of paper, and they didn't have enough money for a dragon, so it was a red light and a puff of smoke and a man off stage with a microphone. But I remember running around in circles eating grapes because we were doing the scene in the forest where the elves are tempting the dwarves to kind of come to their feast. So yeah, it was filled with strange memories.
And is it possible, I might be stretching here, but is it possible that, that experience, your love of The Hobbit that drew you into being in this play also then gave you the bug to become a performer?
Absolutely, without a doubt. In fact, it was reading the book, really. It was reading the book, I think. My imagination was absolutely stimulated by Tolkien's world. And I think as soon as you've had your imagination stimulated in that way, it makes you, every book you ever read, you're dramatizing it in your head. And you're hearing characters' voices and you're visualizing that world. And I do think that I'm a visual actor, like I see things rather than hear them. So if I read a line, I'll see an image. I won't have a cerebral understanding of it. So it means I can be quite stupid as a person. I can be thick and still enjoy the process of acting. Because for me, it's an emotional, physical response rather than anything else.
This will change things for your career, for you personally. What do you expect to happen? I mean, there's no question that this is going to be an enormous hit.
I absolutely don't expect anything to happen. I really don't. I mean, the one thing I really hope is that people just go and enjoy the film. And of course, we're going to be faced with a critical response because 48 frames it's going to be controversial. It's going to divide the critics. But the one thing I hope is that people just say we had a great time in the cinema, and we took our family and we went to the cinema. Because, watching stuff at home, as Pete says all the time, I don't want people watching this on their iPads. I want everyone in the cinema together with this incredible sound system. So that's all I hope for.
Is the process of shooting in 48 frames a second any different for an actor or no? Does it change your performance? Because it's really vivid. And I have this idea that, at 24 frames a second, there's no cheating involved, but you're not every move that you make is so clearly defined. Does it change things at all for you?
Do you know what? It doesn't, and I'm not sure whether that's because Pete protected us from that. I know that the detail, if there was one single hair across my face, he would ask someone to step in and move it. But I just figured that was Pete being a perfectionist. But, I like a certain amount of degradation in a character. I don't like perfection, and actually he did allow that. He allowed things to be broken down, and but yeah, I think it not really. It didn't really change our process. No.
It's interesting because it really is a much different experience. And it was a much different experience than I thought it would be. I mean, I've seen high definition television. But then when you see it on a screen the size of a football field, you think, wow, this is really something. I mean, it is as groundbreaking, I think, as vinyl to CD it's a much different thing.
Yeah, and it really, I'm of a generation that I'm nostalgic. I love black and white films. I love grainy film. It's going to take me a long time to get used to it, but I want to enjoy it because I actually think in terms of high definition, it's much more forgiving to the face. And when you sit there and see Ian McKellen's face in close up and those bright eyes and that incredible life that you see on his face in 48 frames of 3D, I could just sit there and watch that, and he doesn't have to do anything. He can just be still, and the watery film over his eyeballs, Gollum, all of those things. I find it mesmerizing.
Well, for me, that's our time. But for me, seeing it in 3D at 48 frames a second was almost by times like watching a play happen in front of me.
Right.
It looks that vivid.
Yeah, I agree.